Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephanie Ramos in for Linsey Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us tonight. We have breaking news at this hour. The Israeli military says they are currently conducting extensive strikes in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces and Israeli Securities Agency say they are targeting terror targets belonging to Hamas. The strikes throw into doubt the fragile ceasefire that has held for nearly 2 months. The attacks come after President Trump issued what he called a last warning to Hamas last week to release all the remaining hostages being held in Gaza. The president said the U.S. was giving its full support to Israel to, quote, finish the job if the hostages were not freed. And just a short while ago, President Netanyahu said Israel will increase its use of force against Hamas going forward, accusing Hamas of repeatedly refusing to release the hostages and rejecting mediation offers. Here to discuss how this ceasefire agreement could fall apart and Israel's next steps is ABC News correspondent Matt Gutman, who joins us by phone right now. Matt, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just told the public why the ceasefire agreement broke down. Can you share that with us?
He basically said that Hamas, Stephanie, did not accept this Witkoff proposal. They've been talking about this for a couple of weeks now. It seemed that they got close at some point. It also seemed that the U.S. had been engaged in direct talks with Hamas for the first time separately from Israel. It's the first time that any U.S. administration had ever reached out and spoke directly to Hamas. Those apparently also broke down. And so at this point, the Israeli prime minister alerting the military, but also obviously the public, that the ceasefire has broken down. In fact, I spoke to a military official about 30 seconds before we got on air, who said that we've been in negotiations with Hamas. That wasn't working. The question now, Stephanie, is how extensive is this attack going to be? Is this just like a shot across the bow? Is this airstrikes that we're going to see tonight going into tomorrow? Or are we going to see tanks roll across the border into Gaza again, and at what strength? So I just got back from Israel on Saturday night, and multiple military sources there had been talking about another massive invasion of the Gaza Strip to rid Gaza of Hamas once and for all. And they said, instead of sort of the whack-a-mole that Israel had been playing with Hamas, where it would strike one area and then Hamas would pop up somewhere else, because Israel was engaged in multiple fronts at one time, fighting in Gaza, but also in Lebanon. This time they're going to focus all the forces inside Gaza at once and try to truly decimate the terrorist organization. However, obviously they've proven very elusive, and we've seen in these ceremonies that Hamas has come out in these crisp uniforms, AK-47s oiled up. They have new vehicles that appear unblemished from 18 months of war. So the question is, how extensive this is this, and how long does it last? At this point, we simply don't know. But this is certainly the biggest military operation that we've seen in 2 months in the Gaza Strip.
And Matt, those are certainly some really strong and solid questions. How extensive will these strikes be? We know that the IDF says they are conducting extensive strikes right now on Gaza as we speak. But what are their goals militarily speaking?
It sounds very easy to say, Stephanie, and we've heard this from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu so many times, right? It's to destroy Hamas. The question is, what does that look like? And the biggest question that Israelis are asking his public, what happens to the hostages? You fought this war to repatriate the hostages. You entered those negotiations to repatriate those hostages, but where are they? So there are 59 hostages, living and dead. A very senior source told me that Israel believes at this point that there are only 21 living hostages. And it seems that Israel may be willing to roll the dice here. Unclear how far they're willing to go and risk the lives of the remaining hostages in order to try to hit areas that they hadn't hit before, like the center of Gaza, which is largely still intact because that's where it was believed that the Israeli hostages were being held. But remember, there are American hostages, there are Argentine hostages from various nations who have dual Israeli and other citizenship. So it's very complicated, and many Israeli rank and file folks are just wondering, well, what's going to happen? Are these other people going to get killed? That's a very major fear, and that's going to be very hard for Netanyahu to play. He's got a lot of pressure coming from his base to keep fighting, but a lot of the rest of Israel says, no, we need to get those hostages home any way we can, Stephanie.
Absolutely, and the families of those 59 hostages also
Exactly.
awaiting news and wanting to see their loved ones. Matt, thank you so much for your time. We want to turn now to retired General Doug Lute, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Sir, thanks so much for joining us. Days ago, President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, proposed a new agreement that would last until April 20th, which detailed the release of these hostages. What could these latest strikes possibly mean for the fate of those hostages? I know Matt just touched on it a few moments ago, but what could this mean for those individuals, dead or alive?
Well, I think what we've seen, if these reports are right, and if the early reports that Israel is going to resume full-scale military operations prove accurate, it proves that these sorts of ceasefire deals, like this one, which is now 2 months old, are exceptionally fragile. And they're fragile because neither party, in this case, neither the Israelis nor Hamas, have any reason to trust one another. So there's no trust, and the slightest wrinkle in the pattern, the phased approach to the ceasefire, the slightest wrinkle, the slightest dismissal can lead to a renewed conflict. And I think that may be what we're seeing. We should remember that this phase one of the ceasefire was supposed to have been completed 2 weeks ago on March 1st. So we may see a return to full-scale violence. And of course, that spells a disaster for the remaining hostages and for the prospect that eventually a peace could be brought to bear on this conflict.
And Israelis have always wanted eradication of Hamas, but they're still in Gaza. Could this war continue until Hamas is completely out of the picture?
Well, I think that what we're coming to grips with is that the complete destruction of Hamas is likely beyond the military capability of the state of Israel. Unless Israel is going to fully occupy Gaza indefinitely and rule it, it is almost impossible to eradicate completely Hamas. And we've seen reminders of this. As your report indicated just a few minutes ago, we've seen reminder that Hamas persists. Hamas has survived. And Hamas has made a very public display of this over the last several weeks as hostages have been step by step released and so forth. There have been Hamas fighters there brandishing weapons and so forth, and demonstrating to Israel, but also to the people of Gaza, that Hamas is not destroyed. So this is really the rub of the problem.
And we know that Prime Minister Netanyahu says that for now they will increase, of course, these forces against Hamas because Hamas has not released the remaining hostages and refused mediation offers. Do you see any path forward for mediation at this point to ensure that a ceasefire holds?
Well, look, mediation with the good offices of nearby states, so Qatar and Egypt, with the U.S. participating, got us to phase one and brought us the promise, or at least the prospect that we could go from phase one to phase two and eventually phase three, a long-lasting peaceful arrangement in post-war Gaza. But again, I think if the ceasefire breaks down, it is a vivid reminder of just how delicate these ceasefires are, and not only the ceasefire here, but the ceasefire that might be in the works elsewhere, for example, in Ukraine.
Retired General Doug Lute, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Thank you so much, Doug, and thanks to Matt Gutman for calling in tonight and giving us his insights. Israel conducting, again, extensive strikes in Gaza at this moment. Now to the scenes of utter devastation after a massive tornado outbreak and damaging storms swept across the country. 40 confirmed tornadoes across 11 states since Friday, more than 1,000 storm damage reports in at least 24 states, and at least 40 people have lost their lives. And caught on camera, take a look at this moment right here when a tornado touched down in Gordo, Mississippi, filling the air with debris. And in Alabama, an EF2 tornado with winds of up to 120 miles per hour hurtled that empty school bus on top of that high school gym. The roof and many of the school's walls now gone. Oklahoma has declared a state of emergency after wind-driven wildfires killed at least 4 people and damaged hundreds of homes. And tonight, a new western storm is barreling east, threatening extreme fire danger, high winds, and blizzard conditions. ABC's meteorologist Samara Theodore is standing by with a look at what's ahead. But first, let's get right to Victor Oquendo in hard-hit Tylertown, Mississippi.
Tonight, new images of the massive tornado that devastated Jackson County, Arkansas.
Oh my God.
The EF4 with 190-mile-an-hour winds.
That's it.
Oh! Just one of dozens reported during a violent tornado outbreak across the heartland.
Oh, man. Oh, no.
Southwest of Hattiesburg in Tylertown, Mississippi, DJ Lane recording this incredible scene as a tornado destroyed his neighborhood. We watched it with him today. How scary was that moment?
That was one of the most scariest moments of my life, right there.
The devastation from multiple tornadoes in the area goes on for miles. This RV resort leveled. In Plantersville, Alabama, north of Selma, lives turned upside down by an EF3 tornado.
To be honest, you wouldn't think just a wind and tornadoes would do this much devastation.
Anita Owens mourning the loss of her mother, Annie.
She loved everybody. I mean, she loved her kids, her grandkids, her family, her nieces and nephews.
High winds from the same system fueling fires that scorched hundreds of homes in Oklahoma. And tonight, new evacuations for this brush fire southeast of Guthrie. Our Maria Villarreal is there.
The smoke here is thick and heavy, and the winds are blowing at an unbelievable pace. Right now, fire crews are coming from all different areas to try and put out fires that continue to spark just like this.
Wildfires already claiming at least 4 lives in the state.
And tonight, there's more violent spring weather on the way. Meteorologist Samara Theodore is tracking that for us tonight. Samara, what's ahead?
Well, Steph, unfortunately, the fire threat is still looming, and that's because all of the atmospheric ingredients are in play. We have wind gusts potentially reaching 75 miles per hour in certain areas where you're seeing that pink color. This is on Tuesday. Tomorrow, otherwise, winds 33 miles per hour in Oklahoma City, 36 down in Texas. As a result, the National Weather Service has put in place red flag warnings stretching from San Antonio into the Texas Panhandle, into Oklahoma City, areas that have already been hit hard by wildfires, and as far north as Davenport. We've got relative humidity levels down to the single digits, so that dry air coupled with the strong winds keeps that threat for wildfires ahead of us. Now, we're also keeping a close eye on this atmospheric river that ejected another storm, slamming it into Oregon, California, Washington. As a result, winter weather advisories have been issued, especially for the Rockies. It's there where between now and Thursday, we could see anywhere from 6 inches to over a foot of snow. Steph?
Strong winds making it so dangerous out there, and more storms on the way. Samara, thank you so much. Now to the court battle over the Trump administration's mass deportation of alleged gang members using the Alien Enemies Act. A federal judge demanding that the Trump administration explain why it defied a judge's order for 2 planes deporting hundreds to turn around. The planes continued to their destination anyway. And the president's border czar said today, "I don't care what the judges think." Here's senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott.
Tonight, questions over whether the Trump administration brazenly violated an order from a federal judge after he told them not to deport 261 Venezuelan immigrants to El Salvador. But they did it anyway. The administration claims the men are members of criminal gangs, invoking an obscure law, the Aliens Enemies Act of 1798, which allows the government to deport people with little to no due process and was last used to round up Japanese Americans during World War II. And in an emergency court hearing on Saturday, federal judge James Boasberg asked for more information and put the deportations on pause, saying any plane containing these folks that is going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the United States. This is something that you need to make sure is complied with immediately. But by then, 2 planes were already in the air, and they did not turn around. Administration officials claiming those planes had already crossed into international waters. The president of El Salvador, a Trump ally, posting on X, "Oopsie, too late." On Air Force One, President Trump asked if his administration violated the judge's orders.
I don't know. You have to speak to the lawyers about that.
Are you planning to do more deportations?
I can tell you this. These were bad people. That was a bad group of, as I say, hombres.
Today, the president's border czar saying, quote, "I don't care what the judges think."
We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
The White House press secretary raising questions about whether the judge's orders carry weight because it was delivered from the bench and not put in writing.
There's actually questions about whether a verbal order carries the same weight as a legal order, as a written order.
But when I asked the architect of the president's immigration policy, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, whether they would comply with a verbal order from the judge, he questioned whether judges have the authority to rule over the president's policies at all.
Is it the administration's understanding that you would comply with the verbal order?
No district court judge who presides over just some small, little geography of the whole country could possibly presume to have the authority to direct the expulsion of terrorists from our soil, who, by the way, are also here illegally. Thank you, everybody.
And Rachel joins us now from the White House. Rachel, what's the latest on the legal battle?
Well, Stephanie, the administration was back in court today in front of that same judge tonight who asked them to explain why exactly they defied his order. And so when the administration tried to make this distinction between the verbal order and the written order, the judge calling that, quote, a heck of a stretch. And Stephanie, we do have breaking news here from the White House because just moments ago, President Trump announced that he is ending Secret Service protection for former President Joe Biden's 2 children, Hunter and Ashley Biden. It is worth noting that it's not unusual for the adult children of former presidents to receive Secret Service protection for several months after the presidents leave office. Stephanie.
All right, Rachel, thank you. Rachel Scott for us there in the press briefing room there at the White House. Thank you. Staying on this topic, we want to bring in Harold Hungju Ko, the Sterling Professor of International Law at Yale Law School. Professor Ko, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. You're an expert of international security law. So on the matter of the president invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to remove more than 250 undocumented Venezuelan immigrants, does that act actually apply here?
Absolutely not. It's a wartime provision. We're in peacetime. Congress declares war, not the president. It applies to acts by a foreign nation, and this is a drug cartel, and there is no invasion. And so it's a blatantly illegal invocation of that statute to send these people abroad. But the administration has now turned this into a full-fledged constitutional showdown because in trying to complete its illegal act, the judge told them this order of turning them around should be complied with immediately. And they're now saying it wasn't a real order. And the question ought to be, what part of immediately don't you understand?
Yeah, it seems as though there's going to be this back and forth. And I suppose the administration may disagree since they've been calling the influx of immigrants an invasion when technically it's not. But President Trump, he reposted this video on Truth Social. Here it is, originally posted by the president of El Salvador, depicting these Venezuelan migrants being transferred to the terrorism confinement center in El Salvador. It was set, though, to dramatic music, which we're not playing. What's your reaction when you see this video and this depiction?
So what? The president is not a wartime king. He's a person who took an oath to obey the Constitution and laws of the United States of America. The law is clear. The judicial order is clear. It's not, he has no power, and he's not free to violate that order just because he feels like it or because he doesn't like it.
And this act, we've seen this before, right? Around World War II, President Roosevelt invoked the act before to intern American citizens of Japanese, Italian, and German descent during World War II. If the president's invocation of this law is successful, who would that impact?
Every single one of us. Stephanie, this is where it's headed. In the Japanese internment, they invoked it against Japanese American citizens. They were not aliens, they were not enemies, and they were not invaders. And so the Alien Enemies Act, which is about invasion during wartime, had nothing to do with it. The Supreme Court recently said that this ruling, Korematsu, was a disgrace that had been overruled in the Court of Public Opinion. So the question now is, why is it being brought back out for this inappropriate situation? And then why double down on it when the judge issues an order which says immediately, why don't you follow it?
And the architect of the president's immigration policy, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, he disputed the judge's authority over expelling these people. You briefly mentioned it, but I want to take a listen to exactly what he said. Here it is.
The judge's order was patently unlawful. Beyond unlawful, it was an outrageous assault on the Constitution, an outrageous assault on the sovereignty of the nation, and on democracy itself.
So like you said, the administration didn't listen. They didn't immediately turn that plane around. When you hear Stephen Miller there, is he correct about the president's authority here?
Every high school student in America, Stephanie, reads Marbury versus Madison, which says it is the province and duty of the judicial department, the court, to say what the law is. Stephen Miller took an oath to obey the Constitution and laws of the United States. His view on this is something that should be expressed to the court. When the court expresses his view, he follows it or he has no power. So this is a good indication of why this kind of thing is happening, because of this kind of attitude by our executive officials. They should read the Constitution and go back to learn what they obviously missed in civics class.
Well, this back and forth between the court and the administration is certainly not over, so we will likely have you back again to discuss this. Thank you so much for your time, Harold Hongju Ko, Sterling Professor of International Law at Yale Law School. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now to a mishap at New York's LaGuardia Airport. A Delta plane coming in for landing as one of the wings strikes the runway. The pilots seemingly unaware. Here's ABC's Trevor Ault.
Tonight, a Delta passenger jet attempting to land at New York's LaGuardia Airport, striking its left wing on the runway, and the two pilots on board appeared unaware. Air traffic control pointing out the incident.
Somebody saw some sparks from one of your wings. You guys feel anything?
We didn't, but we'll check it.
The Delta regional flight arrived from Jacksonville, Florida just after 10 Sunday night. 80 passengers and crew on board. Conditions were suboptimal but not extreme. Winds gusting to 35 miles per hour with some mist in the air. The plane then circling for another landing attempt. In a statement, Delta says the crew executed a go-around, then landed safely and proceeded to its arrival gate, adding, "We apologize to our customers for the experience." Tonight, that aircraft remains grounded at LaGuardia, out of service. There's no immediate indication when it may return to the air. The flight, operated by the same regional carrier involved in this dangerous incident last month, a fiery crash landing at Toronto's airport.
Certainly glad no one was hurt. Our thanks to Trevor. In other aviation news, the Trump administration is facing setbacks in its efforts to lay off thousands of federal workers. The Federal Aviation Administration is reinstating 133 employees after a federal judge in Maryland ordered their return. The Professional Aviation Safety Specialists Union said probationary employees fired in the Elon Musk-led Doge cuts will receive back pay and should return to duty on Thursday. Probationary IRS employees have also received emails notifying them of their reinstatement, though they are being placed on administrative leave in accordance with the court order, and that's according to notices reviewed by ABC News. And tonight, new developments in the investigation into the disappearance of a Pittsburgh college student while on spring break in the Dominican Republic. The lawyers for an Iowa man being questioned in the case are challenging what they believe is an unlawful detention. Ariel Reshef has been following the story from the Dominican Republic.
Tonight, the young Iowa man authorities believe was the last to see missing University of Pittsburgh student Sadiksha Kananki is asking to return to the U.S. Lawyers for Joshua Reeby alleging he's been questioned for days without charges, held illegally and surveilled by authorities in his hotel, filing a court motion for Reeby to be released after authorities confiscated his passport. Reeby telling our team in Punta Cana off camera, "I just want to go home." When asked about what happened to Kananki, he responded, "No comment," but added, "It's very sad." Sources confirmed to ABC News Reeby walked officials to the beach outside the hotel where Kananki vanished 12 days ago. All along, the authorities here have said the 22-year-old is not a suspect. Authorities believe Kananki likely drowned, police confirming these images show her cover-up and sandals found on the beach. Investigators also reviewing hours of CCTV footage, including this video from a bar inside the Riu Hotel, appearing to show the two together.
Our thanks to Ariel Reshiv. Such a sad story. For a closer look at this story and other legal matters we're all talking about, we're joined by ABC News contributor Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, great to have you with us tonight. Dominican authorities have said the man they're questioning is not a suspect, but can they continue to prevent him from leaving the country?
So, Stephanie, that's the question. And the defense is having what's called a habeas corpus hearing, or asking for one. And that's, as you articulated, a challenge of the constitutionality of detention. So what I'm looking for in this case is, if law enforcement is saying he's not a suspect, we're just questioning him, but also has his passport and he's not able to leave the country, what evidence do you have against this young man that says that you cannot release him? And if that evidence doesn't exist, he should be able to return home. And if he is a suspect down the road, or there's other evidence, then they go about the process of trying to have him return back to the Dominican Republic. But at this stage, they haven't provided enough information, at least for me, to see why he's not able to leave.
We haven't seen that yet. So what's next? What do you think is next in this case?
So what's next would be a hearing where the defense would simply just ask the question, why is he not free to leave? All of the public reporting has said that he's not a suspect. They've questioned him. There's only so much questioning that can happen, and it seems that's going on for days. And so typically, at least the United States, which has similar laws to that of the Dominican Republic, they would have to have probable cause, some kind of explanation or reasoning as to why they believe this person has committed a crime and why they're going to keep them. And if they do have that, then you'd assume there'd be some form of charges that'd be levied against him. But we haven't seen that. So the question is either, do you have the evidence, or are you going to let him go?
Yeah, we'll see what happens in the coming days. Okay, let's move on to another story, Brian, that's also in the news. Drake. Let's talk about Drake. Drake's record label filed to dismiss the rapper's lawsuit against them. So get us caught up on the latest twist in this Drake versus Kendrick Lamar saga.
So we know in Kendrick Lamar and Drake, there has been a rap battle, a rap beef, so to speak, going back and forth with various diss tracks. And then Drake took it to the courts in filing a lawsuit, not necessarily against Kendrick directly, but instead against UMG, the record label that has both Kendrick Lamar and Drake as artists. And so what Drake is saying is that they recklessly put out this song that you just heard there, Not Like Us, where Kendrick Lamar numerous times insinuates and says that Drake is a sexual pedophile, that he likes women or girls who are underage. And so UMG is pushing back with a number of interesting arguments. One saying that this is rhetorical hyperbole, that this is just what happens in diss tracks, that people like Kendrick put out allegations or disses that are not meant to be true, not meant to be perceived as true, but are hyperbole, so out there that no one would believe it to be true, and that this is just the nature of the industry that Drake is in, but also participated in starting these diss tracks with Kendrick Lamar, and they're saying that this lawsuit should be dismissed.
A tricky position for that record label. We'll continue to watch it. Brian Buckmeyer for us tonight. It is always great to have your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over the weekend, President Trump announced an executive order that will effectively shutter international broadcasters, including Voice of America. 1,300 Voice of America employees were placed on leave, and the order similarly gutted 6 other federal agencies, including 2 U.S. news services. Free press advocates criticized the decision, especially because these news outlets were in some places the only open media sources in countries controlled by authoritarian regimes. The executive order seeks to reduce what the Trump administration calls unnecessary bureaucracy. Well, coming up, new body camera video of a man being rescued from a fire that he admitted to starting to escape decades of captivity, allegedly at the hands of his stepmother. But first, paving the way for better care when it comes to giving mothers and newborns a fighting chance. The local leaders facing the infant mortality crisis head on. That's coming up.
While having an emergency C-section, I went into cardiac arrest on the table. It was shocking, to say the least, because she was 12 ounces, literally the size of a soda can.
Infant mortality rates and maternal care are a major cause for concern in our country, especially in communities with low average incomes that are in rural areas or communities of color. But in Fort Worth, Texas, local leaders, nonprofit organizations, and the hospital systems are coming together with new and effective solutions, creating a template that can travel across the country. Our Mireya Villarreal is there for tonight's Prime Focus.
This is Fancy, Anya Mayberry Wallace's miracle child, a preemie baby that almost didn't make it.
When I found that I was pregnant with Fancy, I was actually going through a clinical trial for kidney disease. When I went into labor, it definitely was not as gracious as my previous labors. It was quite rough to where I actually lost consciousness halfway through my delivery.
And your husband had to decide?
He had to make a very quick decision between me and one of our children.
That moment was when Anya and her husband decided their 5th child was their last. But while she was seeking treatment for her kidney disease, she found out she was pregnant. Doctors warned she may not survive the pregnancy and suggested she consider terminating for her own safety. The recommendation was made just a few months before new, more stringent abortion laws were passed in Texas.
What was your biggest fear?
That I would leave my husband alone with my children if he wasn't prepared. And that is kind of what ended up happening. I went into very early labor at 21 weeks due to organ failure and had to have an emergency C-section. While having an emergency C-section, I went into cardiac arrest on the table. They were able to revive me, but I was out for 2 days. It was shocking, to say the least, because she was 12 ounces, literally the size of a soda can.
Fancy spent months in the neonatal intensive care unit while Mom tried to heal physically, mentally, and emotionally.
It was overwhelming because I was struggling with breastfeeding, trying to still be present in what was going on with them and even our older children. And I felt like I didn't have time to reach out for help.
On the brink of a breakdown, Anya made time to get help, but not everyone is as lucky. Especially in Fort Worth, Texas, where infant mortality rates have been an issue for years.
When I moved to Texas, I very quickly was told that there's, this zip code 76104 that just has these bad outcomes.
Fort Worth sits in Tarrant County, Texas, the 4th highest in the state when it comes to infant mortality rates. The zip code 76104 is made up of low-income and predominantly Black families. It's less than a mile from several hospital systems, and yet they have the highest infant mortality rate in the United States, with 19 deaths for every 1,000 live births. It's a problem neighboring Dallas County is seeing as well, forcing local leaders to face the problem head on.
Especially for Black mothers in this country, that in many areas across the United States, it is more dangerous to have a baby today than it was in the 1950s and 60s. Returning to a more community-led approach where mothers never feel alone, that their infants are cared for. This needs to be a systemic change in the way we care for women and children in this country.
Mayor Parker forged a coalition to figure out how to save more babies and their mothers. It includes local hospitals, nonprofit organizations, and the TCU Burnett School of Medicine.
What is very simple in concept is giving an iron pill every day to every pregnant mom. Pennies a day, 1 pill a day, decrease transfusions by 1/3. That's profound. There are very few things in medicine that we can do at that cost, that simplicity, and make that big of a difference in the health of any patient, and in this case, in moms.
Through organizations like the United Way, iron pills are being delivered to moms in need all over North Texas. The coalition is also working to create a more holistic pregnancy plan that focuses on postpartum care, but can start the moment a woman finds out she's expecting.
Up until our 20-week anatomy scan, everything was great. We went into that sonogram appointment and they found a couple of abnormalities. We've got her social security card, cute little bows that I bought with her.
And so we decided to do an amniocentesis. That test was the one that we needed to really understand what was happening, what was going on.
The genetics counselor reached out to us, kind of explained the situation. They say babies with trisomy 13 have a shorter lifespan. They may not survive birth. They may be born still.
Despite the diagnosis, Yvette No carried baby Zoe to term.
We wanted to meet her. We wanted to see her. We wanted, the kids to meet their sister. Zoe lived for 36 hours. And we were able to take Zoe home with us. And it was one of the best decisions. And then shortly after, she passed away.
The No family was able to get through one of the worst moments of their life, they say, because of the ecosystem now being built around families. It starts with early intervention, but can continue well beyond birth if a mother needs it.
The OB checked on me regularly. Dr. Wyman would catch up. Do you have any questions? Feel free to contact us. I had so much support. And yet every day of my pregnancy leading up to when Zoe was born, 20 weeks plus 20 weeks to 37 weeks, I cried almost every day. And that's with the support I had. I can't imagine someone going through this alone and not having that support that we have.
Some of the biggest challenges for medical systems and organizations include rebuilding trust with communities of color and creating access to all types of medical care.
You don't want it to be too high, you want it to be completely covered.
Grant money is helping mothers in North Texas connect with a local doula program, pairing volunteers like Letitia Green with mothers-to-be.
I was a young mother. My first birth was at the age of 14. And so not having that type of support around made me want to get involved in this work.
Chantel Atkins had access to basic health care, but needed more resources and support.
What made you most nervous about being pregnant?
All these stories about some women that don't make it, that their children don't make it. Having her there to ask the questions and give me the guidance and to just mentally prepare me for the birthing process.
It really left an impression on you to the point where now you're talking about wanting to get trained as a doula.
Yeah, I would like to give back the same way that someone gave to me.
So we're gonna start with these.
The hope is to create a template right here in Fort Worth, Texas, that can travel across the country.
If we can do it in 2 counties with 5 million people, every community ought to be able to do this.
Helping families in some of their most vulnerable moments.
Motherhood has to exist. And in order for it to exist, we have to have programs like this in place that are effective and consistent in doing this work.
Programs that could save so many lives. Our thanks to Mireya Villarreal for that report. Coming up, beat by its fast fashion rivals, a popular mall staple is shutting its doors forever. Plus, it's time for a bracket bonanza. March Madness officially tips off tomorrow. Is Florida the favorite? Will Duke duke it out to the top? Is South Carolina a shoo-in? We're taking a look by the numbers. One of the most anticipated sports events is upon us, March Madness. 68 teams will fight for the College Hoops Championship in each of the men's and women's brackets. Those brackets just announced, so let's tip off March Madness by the numbers. UCLA earned the #1 overall seed in the women's bracket, which came as a surprise to the reigning champs from South Carolina on Selection Sunday. Texas and USC also earned #1 seeds. Auburn secured the overall #1 seed for the men's tournament. North Carolina squeaked in as the last team in the field, despite the Tar Heels having a 1-12 record against Quad 1 opponents. 14 Southeastern Conference teams made the men's NCAA tournament in all, which shatters the previous record. So, who will win it all? Well, looking at the record books, UCLA's men's team has won the most. 11 titles, and 11 championships is also the record for women earned by the Yukon Huskies. Speaking of women's hoops, last year, you may remember the women's championship game averaged more than 18 million viewers, the most watched women's basketball game of all time. And with its popularity surging, investment in women's sports more than doubled last year to nearly $245 million. Now, while you're filling out your bracket, keep this in mind. According to the NCAA, the odds of choosing a perfect bracket are roughly 1 in 120.2 billion. Good luck out there. There's a chance. Coming up, the Ivy League school making tuition free for families making less than $200,000 a year. And we take you to the island retirement home for penguins. The aquarium now offering special meals, physical therapy, even acupuncture for their beloved birds. Dozens killed in an illegal nightclub fire in southeastern Europe, an Ivy League education for free, and a retirement home just for penguins. These stories and more in tonight's rundown.
At least 59 people were killed in a fire at an illegal nightclub in North Macedonia. The fire started during a pyrotechnics show on stage at Club Pulse, which authorities say was operating illegally with a fake license and without a valid permit. Officials said the club was packed to twice its official capacity at the time, with only one exit for people to escape. Several people who have been accused of allowing the club to remain open illegally have been arrested in a bribery and corruption probe stemming from the fire. New body camera video shows a rescue of a Connecticut man who had allegedly been held captive for 20 years. Officials in Waterbury had received a call from the man's stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan, who reported a fire at the home she's seen outside.
Who else is in here?
My stepson is in here.
First responders are seen carrying the unnamed 32-year-old to an ambulance, later revealing the emaciated man told them he had intentionally set the fire in his room so he could be freed. Sullivan faces multiple charges, including assault and kidnapping. Her attorney points to the boy's late father, claiming he dictated how the boy would be raised. Forever 21 says it's filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for a second time in the U.S. The operator of the fashion chain and mall staple said U.S. stores would hold liquidation sales and their website will continue to run as the company winds down. The company cited online competition, economic challenges, and changing consumer trends among the reasons for the filing. Dollar General announcing plans to close 96 stores in its latest fiscal report. The company also said 45 of its pop shelf stores would be shut down, with the closures taking place in the first quarter of the fiscal year. Dollar General saying the decision came after a review that looked at the current and expected future performances of stores as well as operating conditions. Harvard University is making tuition free for students coming from families making $200,000 or less per year. The university's president saying the goal was to put the school within financial reach for more students. About 86% of U.S. families will qualify for financial aid under the plan. Undergrads from families making $100,000 or less annually will also have housing and food covered. Changes go into effect for the 2025-2026 academic year. The New England Aquarium in Boston has built a retirement home for its aging penguins. The aquarium says over half of its penguin colony has met or surpassed a typical life expectancy of 10 to 15 years. Now they're going to get their own island where they can be treated for ailments like arthritis and cataracts. Aquarium staff compared the new area to assisted living to give the birds a more comfortable, calmer environment.
Starbucks has to pay up after a man was burned by their hot tea. His lawyers say he suffered permanent disfigurement. ABC's Allison Kozik has this story.
Starbucks ordered to pay up. A California jury ordering the company to pay a delivery driver $50 million after hot tea spilled into his lap. Surveillance video from the drive-thru in Los Angeles shows a barista handing the man a drink carrier containing 3 teas, one seemingly unsecured. The cup then spilling. We freeze the video here. His lawyers say he suffered third-degree burns on his genitals and groin and claim Starbucks had a flagrant disregard for customer safety.
$50 million for a third-degree burn? I was shocked at first. I thought to myself, why so large? But then when I looked at the actual injuries and also a way to try to kind of send a message to Starbucks, because there has been a history, even predating this incident, where other people were burned through drive-thrus.
It's reminiscent of a landmark judgment against McDonald's in 1994 when hot coffee spilled onto a woman's lap.
I screamed, not realizing I was burned that bad. I knew I was in terrible pain.
She suffered third-degree burns and won a nearly $3 million judgment, which was later reduced and settled out of court. In a more recent case, a Florida jury in 2023 awarded $800,000 to a girl burned by a chicken McNugget. As for the Starbucks case, the lawyer for the plaintiff says he agreed to settle for $30 million if Starbucks would apologize and change its policies to prevent such an incident from happening again. But he says Starbucks declined. In a statement, Starbucks said it sympathizes with the man, but we disagree with the jury's decision that we were at fault for this incident and believe the damages awarded to be excessive.
Our thanks to Allison. NASA astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore should start their return to Earth this evening when their spacecraft undocks from the International Space Station. Splashdown off Florida's coast will then occur late Tuesday afternoon. Our Faith Abube has the story.
NASA astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore are closer than ever to touching back down on Earth after an unplanned 9-month stint in space.
First Crew 10 astronaut through the hatch.
Their relief capsule Endurance docking successfully at the International Space Station around midnight Sunday. The ISS team welcoming the astronauts on board. Williams and Wilmore seen happily embracing the newcomers who will serve as their replacements at the station. The SpaceX Dragon Endurance capsule launching into orbit Friday from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, 2 days after the first attempt was abruptly postponed due to issues with a ground support clamp arm. It was last June when Williams and Wilmore set out for the ISS aboard the Boeing Starliner for a week-long trip, but technical issues forcing NASA to return the capsule back to Earth without them. But now, 9 months later, with the Endurance at the ISS, the astronauts will take a second docked spacecraft back home as soon as Tuesday evening.
She was supposed to go up for 8 days, and here she is 9 months later.
Suni Williams' mother and sister speaking with ABC affiliate WCVB.
Part of their job is being able to be flexible and training a lot for a lot of different scenarios, and I felt like she did that, and so did Butch, and they did a great job.
I'm sure they'll be very happy to be home after 9 months. Our thanks to Faith. ABC Audio, in collaboration with 2020, announced today a major expansion in ABC's offering of true crime podcasts. 3 new podcasts will be launched over the next 8 days, including the Crime Scene Weekly with Brad Milkey, Bad Rap, the case against Diddy with Brian Buckmeyer, and 2020, the after show starring 2020 co-anchor Deborah Roberts, where listeners can hear exclusive bonus content following each week's 2020 episode. And with me now, on set, live and in person, Deborah Roberts herself. So lovely to see you in the flesh. It is so nice to see you.
Good to see you, other than just in the hallway.
I know, in
get
passing.
A chance to chat. Exactly.
I love it. I love it. So around here in the hallway, a lot of the 2020 Friday night episodes are called kind of like mini movies because there's so much material. Yeah. It's so interesting. But you've got leftover material most of the time, which is now going into this podcast.
And whether it's leftover material or whether it's our impressions, Stephanie, that's what's so interesting. I bump into people all the time just out and about who are such passionate, I don't want to say fans, I guess they are fans, but viewers of true crime, and they often want to know more about these stories. And sometimes we don't get a chance to put everything in that we know. And so this is an opportunity, and particularly the 2020 after show, which I am starting. We can talk a little bit about how we got to that point. And also, John Quinones and I talked this last week about his particular episode. He went ice fishing because that was part of the story where he was. He talked to us about what it was like. He learned to ice fish. He had never done that before. So just to talk about our impressions, what we discovered, and sometimes things that developed that we didn't get a chance, as you said, to put in the program.
Yeah, I love that this is the perfect vehicle for that too, for that material that didn't make it in the 2020 episode itself. So you mentioned sitting down with our colleague John Quiñones to talk about this latest episode in the podcast that dropped today.
That's right.
You talk about the story in Montana. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
The Montana murders. Yeah, John takes us inside, or took us inside, and for those who might be still catching it on Hulu, you'll be able to see, takes you inside a murder case, and it was one that just sort of baffled officials in this small town in Montana. A woman who was killed, and then her roommate at the time, who barely survived being shot, and trying to figure this out. And John takes us not only inside this case, but we talked a little bit afterwards about the price that the family of the perpetrator had to pay a 15-year-old boy who was sort of implicated in this case. And John talks about, he's a father, what that was like for this 15-year-old boy to have to actually make the ultimate decision to testify against his father. And John shares what that was all about. So yeah, it was a very, very riveting story, but there was more to discuss also about what it's like in that part of the country and what it was like in a small town and a crime like this to shake them up.
I'm really looking forward to these podcasts because oftentimes when we watch the episodes, we're left with so many questions or opinions or our own thoughts on what could have happened. And I feel as though a lot of that will be discussed in the podcast. You have that time to kind of delve into that.
And to do it in a conversational way, the way you and I are getting a chance to chat. You know, we don't get to always do that in our stories. You know, they're very official and kind of for the record. But this is a chance to sort of pull back the curtain and talk a little bit more in a casual way about the people that we met and what our impressions were of them and what that was like for me or the producer to be on the scene. So it's really kind of a nice way to invigorate our program and take it a little further for our passionate viewers.
That's fantastic. A behind the scenes look too, as to how this is put together and how you put the story together.
Yeah.
Deborah, very excited about this podcast, and it dropped today.
Yes, it absolutely drops today, and there are going to be more. I'm working on another one tomorrow, and then I'll be working on another one. So this is just getting started. We're just getting warmed up.
Yeah, you're go. You're always onto something, and it's always interesting projects. I love to see it.
Glad to hear it.
Deborah, great to see you. Thanks so much for stopping by. The first episode of Deborah Roberts' new podcast, 2020, The After Show, a collaboration between ABC Audio and 2020, as we just mentioned, dropped today, to be followed in the coming days by two other new ABC podcasts, The Crime Scene Weekly and Bad Rap, The Case Against Diddy. And don't forget, these podcasts can be found in a new podcast channel on Apple. And finally, tonight, St. Patrick's Day celebrations. Plenty of parades, a sea of green, and World News Tonight anchor David Muir with one very tasty Irish tradition.
You first met Mary O'Halloran right here, the owner of Mario's Irish Pub. It was 4 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, and she had to shut down. Her husband couldn't get home from the docks in Alaska because of travel restrictions, and she was home with their 6 children. With the pub closed, she and the children got to work, making meals for frontline workers. She also started making Irish soda bread scones to support the family with her homemade blackberry jam, her mother's recipe from Ireland, thousands lining up, customers sending photos, and after an Instagram post by Humans of New York, the story going viral. Mary offering an Irish blessing, her regulars helping to carry in the flour, 20,000 pounds of it.
You should see it. It's all over the restaurant.
And 24 hours after our report here, Mary told us she had more than $100,000 in new orders, a new oven arriving to help keep up with demand. World News Tonight viewers from as far away as Las Vegas visiting New York and making sure to stop by to buy her scones.
Hi, David.
Tonight, Mary O. and her message of gratitude.
I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who saw me on America's Strong and everybody who ordered the Irish soda bread scones.
And tonight here, 4 years after our first report on Mary, she tells us she's now opened a brand new shop just for her scones. So many new customers helping to get the word out, posting videos of their taste tests. And tonight, Mary telling us she's hard at work baking and thankful on this St. Patrick's Day.
A fresh scone out of the oven with butter and blackberry jam. You will love it. There's something about the scones. Thank you, David. Thank you, David.
Yes, thank you, David, for sharing that with us. Those scones look fantastic. I've got to stop by. That's our show for this hour. I'm Stephanie Ramos. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us.